The restaurant buzzed with the kind of energy that only expensive establishments in downtown Manhattan could generate on a Friday evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in ivory linens, and the soft murmur of conversations blended with the delicate clink of silverware against fine china. At a corner table near the window, 28-year-old Melissa Crawford sat alone, her fingers wrapped around the stem of a wine glass she hadn't yet sipped from. She had reserved this table 3 weeks ago, back when the reservation was meant for 2, back when she believed that David, her boyfriend of 4 years, would actually show up to celebrate their anniversary. The text message still burned in her mind. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." No phone call, no explanation, just those 8 words that had shattered everything she thought she knew about her life. Melissa had considered canceling the reservation, but something stubborn inside her refused to let David's betrayal steal this moment entirely. She had dressed in her favorite navy dress, the one with the delicate lace sleeves that made her feel elegant and confident. She had styled her auburn hair in loose waves that fell past her shoulders. She had even put on the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her. If she was going to fall apart, she decided, at least she would do it while looking put together. The waiter approached with practiced politeness, his expression carefully neutral as he refilled her water glass. Melissa could feel the pitying glances from nearby tables, the whispered speculations about the woman dining alone in a restaurant designed for romance and celebration. She forced herself to maintain her composure, studying the menu as if the words actually registered in her mind. "Excuse me, dear." The voice was warm and feminine, with a slight tremor that suggested advanced age. Melissa looked up to find an elegant woman standing beside her table. She appeared to be in her late 60s, with silver hair swept into an intricate updo and wearing a stunning emerald gown that probably cost more than Melissa's monthly rent. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, but it was her eyes that caught Melissa's attention. Dark, intelligent, and currently filled with something that looked like desperation. "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt your dinner," the woman continued, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper as she leaned closer, "but I need your help with something rather unusual." She glanced over her shoulder toward a table across the restaurant, where 2 men sat engaged in animated conversation. "Do you see that man in the gray suit? The younger one?" Melissa followed her gaze. The man in question appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair and sharp features that were striking even from a distance. He sat with perfect posture, the kind that suggested either military training or years of being told to straighten his spine. His companion was older, balding, with the self-satisfied expression of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Yes," Melissa said cautiously, unsure where this bizarre interaction was heading. The woman's fingers tightened on the back of the empty chair across from Melissa. "That's my son, Christopher Bennett. The man he's with is Howard Whitmore, a business associate who's been trying to arrange a marriage between Christopher and his daughter for the past 2 years. Her voice took on a sharp edge. "Howard is a manipulative man who sees my son as nothing more than a trophy husband for his social climbing daughter. Christopher keeps refusing, but Howard is persistent, and tonight he brought his daughter along. She's in the powder room right now. And when she returns—" "I'm sorry," Melissa interrupted gently, "but I'm not sure what this has to do with me." The woman's eyes met hers with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "I need you to pretend you're Christopher's fiancée, just for tonight, just long enough to convince Howard and his daughter that my son is unavailable." She paused, seeming to recognize how absurd her request sounded. "I know this is strange, and I have no right to ask this of you, but I'm desperate. Howard has connections that could damage Christopher's business if he feels insulted. But if Christopher is already engaged, you want me to lie to these people?" Melissa's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby tables. "Please," the woman whispered, and there was something raw in her voice that cut through Melissa's skepticism. "I'm Victoria Bennett. My son is a good man, but he's too honorable to create a fictional fiancé himself. He would never lie, even to protect himself from someone like Howard. But if you were to approach our table, if you were to act as though you and Christopher had plans tonight that he forgot—" She reached into her clutch and pulled out what looked like a business card. "I'll compensate you generously for your time. $5,000 for an hour of your evening." Melissa's breath caught. $5,000. That was more than her monthly salary as an elementary school teacher. That was enough to cover the deposit on a new apartment, one she wouldn't have to share with memories of David in every corner. That was enough to change her immediate circumstances from dire to manageable. But it was also completely insane. "Mrs. Bennett," she began, "I appreciate your situation, but I can't just—" "10,000, Victoria said quickly. $10,000 for 1 hour. Please, I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. My son has dedicated his entire life to building his company, and Howard is the kind of man who will destroy everything Christopher has worked for if he feels rejected. But if you're his fiancée, if there's already a commitment, Howard will back off. He's old-fashioned that way." Melissa looked at the woman's face. Seeing genuine fear beneath the expensive makeup and designer clothing, she thought about her own evening, about sitting alone at this table trying to convince herself that she was strong enough to face her heartbreak in public. She thought about David's text message, about 4 years of her life reduced to 8 apologetic words. What did she have to lose? "I'm not an actress," Melissa warned. "I've never done anything like this before." "You don't need to be an actress," Victoria assured her. "You just need to be yourself. Be natural. Christopher will be shocked at first, but he's intelligent. He'll understand what's happening quickly." She glanced back toward the table where her son sat. "The woman in the red dress is approaching their table now. That's Howard's daughter, Veronica. We need to act now before she sits down." Melissa's heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed back from her table. This was ridiculous. This was potentially disastrous. This was the most impulsive thing she had ever considered doing in her carefully planned, predictably safe life. "What's my name supposed to be?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Victoria's face flooded with relief. "Just use your real name. The best lies are built on truth." She placed a hand on Melissa's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." As they crossed the restaurant together, Melissa noticed details she hadn't seen from her table. Christopher Bennett wasn't just handsome, he was striking in a way that made her suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. His dark eyes were focused on Howard Whitmore, with the kind of polite attention that barely masked boredom. The woman in red, presumably Veronica, had just reached their table, her smile predatory and confident. "Christopher, darling," Victoria's voice rang out with perfect theatrical timing. "I'm so glad we found you. Melissa was worried you'd forgotten about your dinner plans." Christopher's head snapped up, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as his eyes landed on Melissa. For one terrifying moment, she thought he might expose the charade immediately, but then something flickered in his gaze. Understanding, perhaps, or resignation, and his features smoothed into a polite smile. "Melissa," he said, and even his voice was impressive, deep and controlled. "I apologize. The meeting ran longer than expected." Howard Whitmore's eyes narrowed as he looked between Christopher and Melissa. Veronica's smile had frozen on her face, her confidence visibly cracking. Melissa took a breath and stepped forward, praying she could pull this off. "It's all right," she said, amazed at how steady her voice sounded. "I know how important your work is." And just like that, she stepped into a lie that would change everything. Christopher Bennett rose from his chair with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention in boardrooms and social gatherings. Up close, he was even more imposing than Melissa had anticipated. Easily 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his tailored suit perfectly, but it was his eyes that caught her off guard. Dark brown, almost black, and currently studying her with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through the fabrication his mother had orchestrated. "Gentlemen, Veronica," he said smoothly, his hand settling on the small of Melissa's back with surprising familiarity. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she had to remind herself that this was all an act. "I'm afraid I'll have to cut our meeting short. As my mother mentioned, I have prior commitments this evening." Howard Whitmore's expression had transformed from jovial to calculating in mere seconds. He was a large man, not fat, but substantial, with the kind of presence that suggested he was used to getting his way through sheer force of personality. "Christopher, you never mentioned you were engaged." His tone carried a note of accusation, as though Christopher had personally betrayed him by having a life outside their business dealings. "It's a recent development," Victoria interjected. Before Christopher could respond, she moved to stand beside Melissa, creating a united front that felt oddly protective. "We've been keeping it quiet, out of respect for Melissa's privacy. She's not accustomed to the kind of attention that comes with the Bennett name." Veronica Whitmore had recovered some of her composure, though her smile remained brittle. She was beautiful in a calculated way. Platinum blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, makeup applied with precision, a red dress that clung to every curve. Everything about her screamed money and maintenance. "How lovely," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And where did you two meet?" "I'm always fascinated by modern romance stories." Melissa felt panic flutter in her chest. They hadn't discussed any details, hadn't created any backstory. She opened her mouth, uncertain what would come out, but Christopher spoke first. "At a charity gala 6 months ago," he said, and the lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that Melissa almost believed it herself. Melissa was there with the educational foundation she works with. "We spent the entire evening talking, and I knew by the end of the night that I'd met someone extraordinary." The words were pretty, practiced, exactly what people in their supposed position would say. But there was something in the way he looked at her as he spoke that made Melissa's breath catch. For just a moment, she could almost believe that Christopher Bennett actually remembered meeting her, actually thought she was extraordinary. "An elementary school teacher," Victoria added, and Melissa realized with a start that she must have mentioned her profession during their hurried conversation. "She works with underprivileged children in Brooklyn. It's wonderful to see Christopher with someone who has such a generous heart." "How quaint," Veronica said, and the word landed like a small insult. "I'm sure that must be quite the adjustment for you, Melissa, being involved with someone of Christopher's stature." Before Melissa could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal her growing irritation, Christopher's hand tightened almost imperceptibly against her back. "Actually, Melissa's work is far more important than anything I do. Teaching shapes the future in ways that corporate mergers never could." He turned to Howard, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "I'll have my assistant send over the revised contracts on Monday. We can finalize the details then." It was a dismissal, polite, but firm. Howard's jaw tightened, but he was too experienced a businessman to make a scene in such a public setting. "Of course. We'll speak Monday." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Melissa. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other." The thread in those words was subtle, but unmistakable. Veronica followed her father with a final, assessing look at Melissa that promised this wasn't over. Once they were out of earshot, Victoria exhaled shakily and sank into one of the vacated chairs. "Thank God. I was terrified Howard would make a scene." She looked up at Melissa with genuine gratitude. "You were perfect, my dear. Absolutely perfect." Christopher, however, was still standing, his hand now fallen away from Melissa's back. She felt the absence of his touch more than she expected. "Mother," he said quietly, "what exactly have you done? I've saved you from making a terrible mistake." Victoria replied, her voice gaining strength. "Howard has been circling for months, and you're too polite to tell him directly that you're not interested in his daughter. He's the kind of man who needs a concrete reason to back off, not just a gentle refusal." "So you hired someone to pretend to be my fiancé?" Christopher's tone was controlled, but Melissa could hear the frustration beneath it. He turned to her, and she saw the apology forming in his eyes. "I'm sorry you were dragged into this. My mother is remarkably resourceful when she sets her mind to something." "Resourceful is one word for it," Melissa said, finding her voice. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by a dawning realization of what she'd just agreed to, though I'm not sure what the legal term is for conspiracy to deceive business associates. To her surprise, Christopher's lips quirked into what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Technically, we're not engaged in fraud. We simply allowed them to draw their own conclusions based on circumstantial evidence." "That's a very lawyerly way of saying we lied," Melissa pointed out. "I never claimed to be anything other than what I am," he countered. "A man having dinner with his mother and a woman named Melissa." Despite everything, Melissa felt herself warming to him. There was something refreshing about his dry humor, so different from David's constant need for validation and attention. Your mother offered me $10,000 for an hour of my time, she said, deciding that honesty was the best policy at this point. I probably should have refused, but I'm going through a rather spectacular life implosion at the moment, and the money would be incredibly helpful. Victoria pulled out her phone. I'll transfer it immediately. You've more than earned it. She paused, her expression growing thoughtful. Although I suspect we may have a problem. Just one? Christopher asked dryly. Howard is suspicious by nature. He's going to investigate Melissa's background when he discovers that she's not actually engaged to you, that there are no society announcements, no ring, no history of you two being seen together. Victoria shook her head. He'll know this was a setup, and that will make him even more determined to force a connection between you and Veronica. Melissa's stomach sank. So you're saying that this 1-hour performance isn't going to be enough? I'm saying, Victoria replied carefully, that we may need to extend the arrangement. At least for a few weeks, until Howard loses interest and moves on to another target for his daughter. Absolutely not, Christopher said immediately. I'm not going to ask Ms. Crawford to continue this charade. It's not fair to her, and it's not necessary. I'll handle Howard directly. You've been trying to handle Howard directly for 2 years, Victoria pointed out. He doesn't respond to polite refusals. He responds to competition and defeat. Right now, he thinks he's lost the competition for your attention. If we maintain that illusion for just a little while longer— How much longer? Melissa heard herself ask. Both Bennetts turned to look at her in surprise. She wasn't sure why she was even considering this, except that $10,000 had sounded good, and if Victoria was offering more money for more time, Melissa's practical side was sitting up and paying attention. And how much? Victoria's eyes brightened. A month, perhaps 6 weeks at most, just long enough for the engagement to seem real and for Howard to move on. As for compensation, what would you consider fair? Melissa did some quick mental math. Her rent was $2,200 a month. She had credit card debt from the vacation she and David had taken last summer, back when she'd still believed in their future. She had student loans that seemed to grow rather than shrink with each payment. $50,000, she said, expecting them to laugh at her audacity. $25,000 up front, the rest when we stage a mutual amicable breakup. Christopher's eyebrows rose. That's quite a sum. That's quite a lie, Melissa countered. And it's going to require me to be available for public appearances, to learn enough about your life to be convincing, and to potentially face people like Howard Whitmore, who will be looking for any crack in our story. She met his gaze steadily. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right, but it needs to be worth the risk to my reputation and my peace of mind. Victoria looked at her son. She's not wrong. If we're going to do this, we need to commit to it fully. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, studying Melissa with that penetrating gaze that made her feel exposed and seen in equal measure. Finally, he sighed. On one condition. We maintain complete honesty between the three of us. No more surprises. No more schemes without consultation. If Miss Crawford agrees to this arrangement, she deserves to be treated as a full partner in this deception, not as a paid actress following a script. Agreed, Victoria said immediately. Melissa looked between them, mother and son, both watching her with varying degrees of hope and resignation. She thought about her empty apartment, about David's text message, about the dinner reservation she'd kept out of sheer stubbornness. She thought about how, just an hour ago, she'd been sitting alone, convinced that her life was falling apart. Maybe this was insane. Maybe this was the worst decision she could possibly make. Or maybe, just maybe, this was exactly the kind of chaos she needed to shake herself out of the safe, predictable rut her life had become. All right, she said, I'm in. But we're going to need to establish some ground rules. Christopher extended his hand. Welcome to the Bennett family circus, Melissa Crawford. I have a feeling this is going to be an interesting 6 weeks. As she shook his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip, Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped off a cliff without checking to see if there was water below. The question was whether she would crash or learn to fly. The following Wednesday evening found Melissa standing in front of her bathroom mirror, trying for the 3rd time to get her eyeliner symmetrical. Her hands were shaking slightly, which wasn't helping matters. In less than an hour, she would be attending a formal dinner at the Bennett family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. her first official appearance as Christopher's fiancée. The past 5 days had been a whirlwind of preparation that left her head spinning. Victoria had insisted on a complete wardrobe overhaul, claiming that Melissa's current closet, while perfectly respectable for a schoolteacher, wouldn't withstand the scrutiny of New York's social elite. They'd spent an entire day shopping at boutiques, where the sales associates knew Victoria by name and brought out champagne without being asked. Melissa had tried to refuse, uncomfortable with accepting so much. But Victoria had been adamant. "You're doing us an enormous favor," she'd said firmly. "The least I can do is ensure you're properly equipped for the role." Christopher had been more practical in his approach. He'd arranged for them to meet twice over coffee, ostensibly romantic dates for any observers, but actually opportunities to build a convincing backstory. Melissa had learned that he was 34, had graduated from Princeton with a degree in economics, and had built his investment firm from the ground up over the past 8 years. He ran marathons, disliked oysters, and had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard more than once. In turn, she'd told him about her childhood in small-town Pennsylvania, her decision to become a teacher despite her parents' hopes that she'd pursue something more lucrative, and her recent breakup with David. She'd surprised herself by how much she shared, though she'd kept the details vague. Christopher had listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that made her feel truly heard in a way David never had. "You really love teaching," he'd observed during their second meeting. "I can hear it in your voice when you talk about your students. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do," she'd admitted. "Even when it's exhausting and frustrating and I'm grading papers until midnight, I can't imagine doing anything else." He'd looked at her with something like respect. That kind of certainty is rare. Most people spend their lives not knowing what they're passionate about. Now, as Melissa finally achieved acceptable eyeliner and reached for her lipstick, her phone buzzed with a text message. Christopher's name appeared on the screen. "Driver will be there in 20 minutes. Mother wanted me to warn you that Aunt Patricia will be at dinner. She's formidable. Don't let her intimidate you." Melissa smiled despite her nerves. Over the past few days, she and Christopher had fallen into an easy texting rhythm. He was surprisingly funny in writing, with a self-deprecating wit that made her laugh out loud more than once during her lunch breaks at school. She replied, "More formidable than pretending to be engaged to someone I met less than a week ago?" His response came quickly. "Fair point. You're handling this with remarkable grace, by the way. Most people would have run screaming by now." "The day isn't over yet," she typed back, then added, "Should I be worried about Aunt Patricia? Only moderately. She's my father's sister. Very traditional, very opinionated, and she has an uncanny ability to detect dishonesty. But she's also been trying to set me up with unsuitable women for years, so she'll probably just be relieved I've finally settled down." Melissa's stomach clenched. She'd been so focused on convincing Howard Whitmore and his daughter that she hadn't fully considered the implications of deceiving Christopher's entire family. "Christopher, are you sure about this? Lying to business associates is one thing, but your family is already aware of the arrangement." Mother told Aunt Patricia the truth. She thought it was hilarious. The relief that flooded through Melissa was enormous. "So I don't have to fool her?" "Oh, you absolutely do. She's going to test you mercilessly, but purely for her own entertainment. Think of it as a performance review with someone who's rooting for you to succeed." 25 minutes later, Melissa slid into the back of a sleek black car that was nicer than any vehicle she'd ever been in. The driver was professional and silent, navigating through Manhattan traffic with practiced ease. As the city gave way to suburbs and eventually to the manicured landscapes of Greenwich, Melissa felt her anxiety ratchet up another notch. The Bennett estate was exactly as imposing as she'd feared. The car turned through iron gates and up a long, tree-lined driveway that ended in a circular courtyard in front of a Georgian-style mansion that looked like it belonged in a period drama. Warm light spilled from tall windows, and Melissa could see silhouettes moving inside. Christopher was waiting at the front door, having apparently watched for her arrival. He'd traded his business suit for dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. A casual elegance that somehow made him even more attractive. As Melissa stepped out of the car, his expression shifted to something she couldn't quite read. "You look beautiful," he said, and the words sounded genuine, rather than performative. Melissa smoothed down the deep green dress Victoria had insisted she buy, silk, subtly elegant, and far more expensive than anything she'd owned before. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." He offered his arm, and she took it, grateful for the solid presence beside her as they walked through the entrance hall. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior: high ceilings, gleaming hardwood floors, and artwork that was probably worth more than Melissa's annual salary. "Nervous?" Christopher asked quietly. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I use the wrong fork? What if I accidentally reveal something that contradicts our story? What if—" "Melissa." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his free hand coming up to gently grip her arm. "Breathe. You're not performing for hostile critics tonight. This is just a family dinner with people who already know you're doing us a favor. Aunt Patricia will probably ask inappropriate questions. My mother will fuss over you, and Uncle Richard will talk too much about his golf game. Just be yourself." "But myself isn't engaged to you," she pointed out. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Then be the version of yourself who's decided to help out a family in an absurd situation. That's authentic enough." Before Melissa could respond, a door opened and Victoria emerged, resplendent in a midnight blue dress. "There you are." Patricia arrived early, naturally, and she's already asking pointed questions. She looked at Melissa with warm approval. "My dear, you look absolutely stunning. That color is perfect on you. Thank you, Mrs. Bennet. Victoria, please. We're going to be family after all." She winked, clearly enjoying the charade. "Now, shall we face the tribunal?" The dining room was elegant, but not as formal as Melissa had feared, with a table set for 6. An older woman with sharp features and perfectly coiffed silver hair was already seated, a glass of red wine in her hand. She looked up as they entered, and her gaze immediately fixed on Melissa with keen intelligence. "So, this is the mystery woman who's captured my nephew's notoriously elusive heart," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Patricia Harrington. I'd say it's lovely to meet you, but I prefer to reserve judgment until after I've thoroughly interrogated you." "Aunt Patricia," Christopher said with exaggerated patience, "please try to be civilized for at least the first course. Where's the fun in that?" Patricia took a sip of wine, never breaking eye contact with Melissa. "Sit down, dear. Tell me everything. How did Christopher propose? I want all the romantic details." Melissa felt her mind go blank. They hadn't discussed this. She and Christopher exchanged a quick glance, and she saw the same realization in his eyes. "It was nothing elaborate," Christopher said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Melissa. "Just the two of us, actually. I'd planned something more dramatic, but the moment felt right, and—" "Let her tell it," Patricia interrupted. "I want to hear Melissa's version. The woman always remembers these things differently than the man, and her version is usually more accurate." Melissa sat down, her mind racing. She thought about David, about the proposal that had never come despite 4 years together. Despite all her hints and hopes, she thought about the kind of proposal she would have wanted, the kind that would have felt real and meaningful rather than performative. "We were at my apartment," she began, the lie forming as she spoke. "It was a Sunday morning, and we'd just finished breakfast. Christopher was helping me wash dishes, which sounds mundane, but it was actually perfect. We were just comfortable together, you know? Not trying to impress each other, just being ourselves." She glanced at Christopher and found him watching her intently. Something unreadable in his expression. She continued, the words flowing more easily now. "He was drying a plate when he suddenly got very quiet. Then he set the plate down, turned to me and said—" She paused, making herself meet Patricia's scrutinizing gaze. "He said, 'I don't want to do this with anyone else.' Not the dishes, not Sunday mornings, not anything. And then he asked me to marry him. No ring yet, no grand gesture. Just honesty." The room had gone completely silent. Victoria's eyes were suspiciously bright, and even Patricia looked touched. Christopher's hand found Melissa's under the table, squeezing gently. Whether it was gratitude or something else, she couldn't tell. "Well," Patricia said finally, clearing her throat. "That's either the most genuine proposal story I've ever heard, or you're a remarkably talented liar. I can't decide which." "Why not both?" Melissa heard herself say, and Patricia's laugh was unexpected and delighted. "Oh, I like her," she declared, raising her glass. "She's got spine. Christopher, you'd better not let this one get away." Dinner proceeded with surprising ease after that. Patricia's interrogation continued, but grew less pointed, more genuinely interested. Victoria kept the conversation flowing smoothly, and Christopher's Uncle Richard did indeed talk extensively about golf. Melissa found herself relaxing, even enjoying the evening. It was during dessert that everything changed. A younger man burst into the dining room, his expensive suit rumpled and his face flushed. He looked enough like Christopher to be a relative, though his features were softer, less defined. "Sorry I'm late," he said breathlessly. Traffic was a nightmare. His eyes landed on Melissa, and confusion flickered across his face. "Who's this?" Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Daniel. You weren't supposed to be here tonight. Change of plans," Daniel said, dropping into an empty chair. "And you still haven't introduced me to Christopher's dinner guest." "This is Melissa Crawford," Christopher said, his voice carefully neutral. "My fiancée. Melissa, this is my brother, Daniel." Daniel's eyes widened, then narrowed. He looked between Christopher and Melissa, then at Victoria, and something calculating entered his expression. "Fiancé? That's interesting. Congratulations." The word dripped with sarcasm. "Funny, I didn't see any engagement announcement. No ring either, I notice." "We're keeping it quiet for now," Christopher said, but there was a warning in his tone. "Right. Quiet." Daniel leaned back in his chair, a humorless smile playing on his lips. "You know what I think? I think this whole thing is a sham. Mother's been trying to get you married off for years, and suddenly you have a mystery fiancé no one's ever met. It's too convenient." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Melissa felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment everything fell apart. But then Christopher stood, his movement controlled, but unmistakably threatening. "Daniel, I need to speak with you. Privately, now." The two men left the room, and Melissa could hear the murmur of heated voices from the hallway. Victoria reached across the table to pat her hand. "Don't worry, dear. Daniel has always been jealous of Christopher's success. This isn't about you." But Melissa knew better. Daniel suspected the truth, and from the way Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes, she knew it too. When Christopher returned 15 minutes later, his jaw was tight and his eyes hard. "I apologize for my brother's behavior. He won't be bothering us again tonight." But as Melissa met his gaze, she saw something there that made her stomach sink. Daniel knew their secret, and the question was, what was he planning to do with that information? The confrontation with Daniel had cast a shadow over what remained of the evening, but Melissa had managed to maintain her composure through coffee and polite goodbyes. Christopher had insisted on driving her home himself, dismissing the hired car with a quiet word to the driver. Now they sat in his Mercedes, the engine idling outside her modest Brooklyn apartment building, the silence between them heavy with unspoken concerns. "I'm sorry about Daniel," Christopher said finally, his hand still gripping the steering wheel though the car was in park. "He's always resented that our father left the company to me. He thinks he was passed over unfairly." "Was he?" Melissa asked quietly. Christopher's laugh was bitter. "My father spent 20 years trying to teach Daniel the business. Daniel spent those same 20 years partying, making poor investments with family money, and generally proving he couldn't be trusted with anything more significant than choosing wine for family dinners." He turned to face her, and in the dim light from the street lamp, his expression was weary. "But that doesn't make him any less dangerous. If he decides to expose our arrangement to Howard Whitmore, why would he do that? Because hurting me is more important to Daniel than protecting the family reputation." Christopher ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its perfect styling. "I should never have agreed to this plan. It was unfair to drag you into our family dysfunction." Melissa unbuckled her seatbelt and shifted to face him fully. "Christopher, I went into this with my eyes open." "Well, mostly open," she amended with a small smile. "I knew there were risks. A bitter brother is just one more complication. You're remarkably calm about this." "Trust me, I'm panicking internally," she admitted, "but I've learned something over the past week. Sometimes the things that seem like disasters end up being exactly what we needed." She thought about David's text message, about how devastated she'd been just days ago. Already, that pain felt distant, replaced by something more interesting and alive. Christopher studied her for a long moment. "You're nothing like I expected when my mother first approached you. What did you expect? Someone doing it purely for the money. Someone who would treat this like a business transaction and nothing more." His voice softened. "But you've been genuinely kind to my mother. You made Patricia laugh, which is no small feat. And that story about the proposal..." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "It was the kind of proposal I would want to give someone, if I ever actually got engaged. Simple, honest, real." Melissa's heart did something complicated in her chest. "It was the kind of proposal I would want to receive," she said quietly. David never understood that grand gestures aren't the same as genuine feeling. "David is an idiot," Christopher said with such conviction that Melissa laughed. "You don't even know him. I know he let you go. That's enough." The words hung between them, charged with something that felt dangerous and electric. Melissa knew she should get out of the car, put distance between herself and whatever was building in this intimate space. Instead, she heard herself asking, "What are we going to do about Daniel?" Christopher's expression hardened with determination. "I'm going to handle my brother. You don't need to worry about him." But worry wasn't quite what Melissa was feeling as she finally said goodnight and climbed the stairs to her apartment. It was something more complicated, anticipation mixed with trepidation, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated public appearances. They had dinner at trendy restaurants where Christopher was recognized, attended a charity gala where Melissa wore a stunning silver gown and learned to navigate conversations with people who had more money than she could fathom, and spent a Sunday afternoon walking through Central Park while paparazzi snapped photos from a discreet distance. Through it all, something subtle was shifting between them, the casual touches required for their charade. Christopher's hand at the small of her back, his fingers lacing through hers, the way he would lean close to whisper something in her ear, began to feel less like performance and more like something natural. Melissa caught herself looking forward to their dates, found herself genuinely laughing at his jokes, discovered that she was sharing real thoughts and feelings rather than maintaining a careful facade. Her students had noticed the change in her. "Ms. Crawford, you seem really happy lately," one of her 4th graders had observed during recess. "Did something good happen?" "Just life being surprising," Melissa had answered, which felt more honest than any lie she'd told in the past weeks. It was during their 3rd week of fake engagement that Daniel made his move. Melissa was at school, helping a struggling student with long division, when her phone buzzed with an urgent text from Victoria. "Daniel went to Howard Whitmore, meeting at the house tonight, 7 p.m. I'm so sorry." Her hands went cold. This was it. The moment when everything collapsed. Howard would know they'd deceived him, would likely retaliate against Christopher's business, and Melissa would be exposed as a fraud to everyone who'd believed their story. She texted Christopher immediately. "I saw your mother's message. What do you need me to do?" His response came quickly. "Be there tonight. We face this together." When Melissa arrived at the Bennett estate that evening, the atmosphere was tense. Victoria met her at the door, her usual composure cracked around the edges. "Howard is in the study with Christopher and Daniel. He's been here for an hour already." "What's Daniel telling him?" "The truth, presumably. That you and Christopher barely know each other. That the engagement is a fabrication designed to make Howard back off." Victoria's hands twisted together. "I'm so sorry, Melissa. This is all my fault. I should never have put you in this position." "You didn't force me," Melissa reminded her. "I made my own choice." Before Victoria could respond, the study door opened and Christopher emerged. His expression was unreadable, controlled in that way Melissa had learned meant he was working hard to contain strong emotions. "Melissa, thank you for coming." He glanced at his mother. "Howard wants to speak with all of us." The study was all dark wood and leather, the kind of masculine space that probably hadn't changed since Christopher's father was alive. Howard Whitmore sat in one of the wing chairs, looking smugly satisfied. Daniel lounged against the bookshelf, his expression triumphant. Christopher moved to stand beside Melissa, and she felt the tension radiating from his body. "Ms. Crawford," Howard began, his voice carrying false sympathy. "I'm sorry you've been dragged into this unfortunate situation. Daniel has explained everything, how Victoria hired you to pose as Christopher's fiancée, how this entire engagement has been nothing but an elaborate deception." Melissa felt her face flush, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Whitmore, please let me finish." Howard leaned forward, his eyes calculating. "I understand why you agreed to this scheme. Victoria can be very persuasive, and I'm sure the money was appealing, but you need to understand that Christopher has made a fool of me, and I don't take kindly to being manipulated." "I'm the one who manipulated you," Victoria interjected sharply. "Leave Melissa out of this." "Oh, I intend to," Howard said. "In fact, I'm prepared to forget this entire incident occurred. I won't retaliate against Christopher's business, won't spread word of this deception through our social circles." He paused for effect. "On one condition." Christopher's voice was ice. "What condition?" "Christopher agrees to seriously court my daughter Veronica. Real dates, genuine effort, giving her a fair chance at becoming Mrs. Bennet." Howard smiled. "I think that's more than reasonable, given the insult you've dealt me." The room erupted. Victoria protested loudly. Daniel looked delighted at the chaos, and Christopher's face had gone dangerously blank. But Melissa barely heard any of it over the roaring in her ears. This was the moment. The moment when Christopher would agree, when the charade would officially end, when Melissa would collect her payment and return to her normal life as though the past few weeks had been nothing more than a strange dream. Except somewhere along the way, it had stopped feeling like a dream. Somewhere between coffee dates and family dinners, between learning his favorite books and sharing her own fears, between posed photographs and genuine laughter, Melissa had made a terrible mistake. She'd fallen in love with Christopher Bennet. The realization hit her with physical force. She'd fallen in love with his dry humor and unexpected kindness, with the way he listened to her stories about teaching as though they mattered, with his loyalty to his mother and his patience with his difficult family. She'd fallen in love with the man behind the CEO image, the person who washed dishes on Sunday mornings, and would propose without fanfare because the moment felt right. And now she had to watch him agree to date another woman. "No," Christopher said, and the single word cut through the noise like a blade. Howard's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Christopher moved, and suddenly his hand was in Melissa's, warm and solid and real. "I'm not going to date your daughter, Howard. Not for my business, not for my reputation, not for anything." "Then you'll face the consequences. I don't care." Christopher's voice was firm, certain. "Because Daniel was wrong about one thing. This engagement might have started as a fabrication, but somewhere along the way, it became real." Melissa's heart stopped. She looked up at Christopher and found him staring down at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I've spent the past 3 weeks pretending to be in love with you," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers, "and I just realized I'm not pretending anymore. Maybe I haven't been for a while." He turned back to Howard. "So do your worst. Spread whatever stories you want, damage my business however you can. I'm not giving up the real thing for a performance." The silence that followed was deafening. Howard's face had gone red with fury. Daniel looked shocked. Victoria had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face, but Melissa only saw Christopher. "You love me?" she whispered. "I know I have no right," he said quickly. "I know this started as a business arrangement, that you agreed to help us out of a difficult situation, but Melissa, these past weeks with you have been the most genuine thing in my life. The way you care about your students, your kindness to my mother, your courage in facing situations that terrify you." He squeezed her hand. "I fell in love with who you are, not who you were pretending to be. Christopher." Her voice broke on his name. "I fell in love with you too. I think I have been since that story about the proposal, since I realized what kind of man you really are beneath all this." She gestured at the study, at Howard and Daniel, and the whole complicated mess they'd created. Christopher's expression transformed, wonder replacing uncertainty. "Really?" "Really," she confirmed, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time. "This is insane. We barely know each other." "We know each other better than most couples who've dated for years," he countered. We've faced family drama, hostile business associates, and my brother's betrayal. If we can handle all that, we can handle anything." "How touching," Howard said acidly, rising from his chair. "But this changes nothing. You've still made an enemy today, Christopher." "Then I've made an enemy," Christopher replied without looking away from Melissa. "Some things are worth the cost." Howard stormed from the study, and Daniel followed quickly. His moment of triumph turned to ashes. Victoria approached slowly, her expression radiant. "I knew it," she said softly. "From the moment you told that story about the proposal, I knew something real was happening between you two." "You planned this," Christopher accused, though there was no heat in his words. "I hoped," Victoria corrected. "There's a difference." She looked at Melissa with genuine affection. "Welcome to the family, dear. For real this time." 3 months later, Melissa stood in Christopher's apartment, their apartment now, since she'd moved in 2 weeks ago, washing dishes after Sunday breakfast. Christopher appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. "I have something for you," he murmured. She turned in his arms to find him holding a small velvet box. Her heart skipped. "Christopher, I know we've already done this backward," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "Started with the fake engagement, fell in love in the middle, and now we're living together. But I want to do this part right." He took her hand, and she saw that his was trembling slightly. "Melissa Crawford, will you actually marry me? Not as a business arrangement or a favor to my family, but because you love me and I love you, and I don't want to do any of this, the dishes, Sunday mornings, anything, with anyone else?" Melissa was crying again, but this time from pure joy. "You stole my proposal story, our proposal story," he corrected. "I've just been waiting for the right moment to make it real." "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you. For real this time." As he slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her with a passion that made her forget about the dishes, about Howard Whitmore and Daniel, and all the complications that had brought them together, Melissa reflected on how strange life could be. She'd gone to that restaurant alone, heartbroken, and certain her life was falling apart. Instead, she'd found something she never knew she was looking for. A love that was messy and complicated and absolutely real. 6 months after that, they married in a small ceremony with only close family and friends. Patricia gave a speech that made everyone laugh and cry. Victoria beamed throughout the entire event. And when Christopher whispered, "I love you," as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Melissa knew that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places, even from a dinner alone, interrupted by a desperate mother with an impossible request, especially